This is the third in our series here of how do we incorporate more writing into our course when we're teaching online, which is something that we all kind of have to do because we no longer have the classroom interactions, and we no longer have, if you were someone who gave tests or quizzes, hard to do that in the current modality, right? So we're all assigning more writing, and today's session is on how do we respond to all that extra writing that we're assigning.
I would say also, even though we are, this is focused or at least instigated by online learning, I think that the principles for responding to writing are pretty much the same, whether you're doing them in an online environment or a traditional face-to-face environment or hybrid for that matter. So like the principles and the options don't really change. The only thing that really changes is some of the technological modalities that you can use. And we have some very specific and pretty simple, actually, suggestions for that at the end. So we will be talking about like how to comment in Blackboard a little bit. But overall, I think what we're going to be telling you today is really applicable to any assignment, whether it's face-to-face or not.
Right, and that's also the other caveat that we've sort of been giving for each one of these is, clearly we are going to be online next semester. So you're also, and maybe even next fall for all we know. So you have to, the effort you're putting in here is not wasted effort. You're going to be using this again. Okay, just what were our other disclaimers, Tara? We forgot to do them. So we don't have time to go around and do introductions. Just would take up too much of the session itself. So introduce yourself in the chat so that everyone knows who everyone else is. And I forgot the other disclaimer.
The other disclaimer is if you can, we're kind of apologizing because it's, we would normally make a session like this very interactive, but given the time constraints and the Zoom modality, it's a little bit more delivery. We're more presenting things to you, although there is some time towards the end where we're going to ask you to get into some groups and do a little bit more. But also, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, or if they're really pressing, you can interrupt us.
Right, or use that raise the hand feature.
Oh yeah, that's right.
If we're not paying attention, just get louder.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, so as we did at the start of the last session, we thought we'd review session 2 before we head into session 3. And so session 2 was on assignment design. And before I even do this slide, I wanted to say that the whole thing should be lining up for you, right? Mm-hmm. You're planning out your course curriculum, and part of that planning of the curriculum is what writing am I going to assign? It's not an ancillary thing or a thing you tap on the end. You design your course with the writing in mind from the beginning. And then when you design the writing into the course, part of your curriculum design is designing the writing assignments themselves. And today we will talk about responding to those assignments. When you do the trajectory, all 3 in a row like that, now the students are understanding why they're doing the work. You're tying the work to your curriculum, so they are actually learning your material that you want them to learn by doing the writing. And when you respond and evaluate, they know what they're going to be evaluated on if you line up these 3 things in a row. But we're just going to review session 2, which was basically you want to design assignments that are unique to your course. You don't want to do the standard assignments of compare and contrast these 2 authors, because you're going to end up with plagiarized papers and papers that the students are not really motivated to write. You want to spend the time designing curriculum with your writing assignments. How can you get the students to learn the material better, but also how can you get them excited about your material through the writing you ask them to do? So your foreground inquiry in your writing assignment design, we suggested that you be disciplinary. You want, part of what you're teaching them is How do you think like how do you think like an anthropologist? How do you think like a mathematician? How do you think like a someone who's working in public management? Okay, or how do you think like a criminologist? Right. So you want to be disciplinary. You want to have writing assignment pages with clear and concise directions. You want to be explicit about the purpose, the genre, the audience, and the modality of your assignment. Tell them explicitly what kind of text you're looking for, what is the reason why the students are doing this text, who are they writing for, and what technology or method of delivery are they going to use for this assignment. Okay, you need to provide models. Some people are scared of models, but if you do the foregrounding inquiry one, you don't have to worry about models because the students won't be writing the same paper each time. So you want to provide them something to go by in order to realize the standards and expectations for your assignment. You want to explain the grading in the assignment page. Not wait till they get the grade. Explain it to them what you're grading on. And you want to scaffold large assignments, either by steps or sections or pieces, okay? So smaller assignments, and that last line there is intentional, with feedback throughout, right? So you're not just assigning something and then giving them a round of feedback when you give the grade, because then what's the purpose of the feedback, right? So you want to give feedback throughout the process.
And I'll just reiterate what Tim is saying, that all of the things that are, these are all things that are linked. So even if you weren't able to see session 1 or 2, you might want to go back and look at them, because it's really, they all tie in together, right? And so if you, the way you respond is also, it's going to be, it's impacted by the kind of assignment that you wrote, and if you have a rubric, and if you are clear, and all of these things. So they're not divorced from one another.
Okay, so my timing was off because Google Slides is different than PowerPoint. It only moves forward, I guess, when you use your pad here, and it's a little touchy. Anyway, yeah. Does this sound familiar? I actually think I love the drawing and everything, but I actually think the person should look a little more aggravated. Yes. This is our lives right now. So before you start grading or responding, you need to decide on your purpose. So using that word right back at you that we used, that you're going to direct at the students, what's the purpose of the assignment? Well, what's the purpose of your writing to the student about their assignment, right? And be strategic about your time. Clearly we cannot read every word the students write. I often say, if you're trying to read every word that students write, then you're not assigning enough writing. Mm-hmm. You need to figure out how best to respond and what ways to respond that makes the time management possible. Okay, so purpose. You are not always, and you are not just grading. You can be encouraging and supporting. Notice and support what they're writing. You can be responding. You're reacting and you're getting in a dialogue with the text and therefore with the writer. You can be guiding, providing direction or advice for revision. There's no sense doing that step if the paper is done, right? Or you can be grading to evaluate for success or to judge for meeting standards, right? So if you look at the photos, the first one is you're just trying to get them to go further with their work. You're just trying to get them to think deeper, to do the next step in the process, to bring in another reading. That's it. That's the purpose of your comments. The second one, you're trying to have a conversation about the content of the course. They said this, and you're saying this back because they haven't thought about that yet. Or you're adding in something that that you haven't got to in the course yet. Okay, so you're having a back and forth, a conversation. I don't know if anyone has seen Krista Madrazo do her little workshop on this, where she uses the Google comment feature to have a running dialogue with students about their work, just a back and forth conversation. Or are you guiding? The student has a bunch of paths. They may have chosen the right one. They may have chosen a somewhat right one. They may have chosen a terrible one. Are you guiding them to what they need to do next? That one on the end, man, we say it, how horrible it was in whatever class when we got our paper back and all the faculty member did was put the letter grade on it and hand it back. We've all had that experience. That's actually not a bad thing, right? That's the final step, though. If you didn't do any of the other steps, that's why we feel terrible, right? But if this is a final product and it's just an evaluation, just tell me what the thing is. It's an A. Okay, good. Move on. Okay, so you need to identify your purpose before you start your round of responding. Did you want to do this one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you really want to think about yourself in different ways, right? So every time you go to respond to a piece of writing, you're not always in the same position, right? So if you're looking at a draft or a low stakes assignment, something that's leading up to a more high stakes assignment like a paper or a final draft of a paper, you're more like a cheerleader, right? You're there, you're trying to egg them on, you're trying to get them to feel encouraged, you're trying to say, this is working, keep doing this. You're coaching them like, okay, this looks great, but maybe you should work on organization a little bit here. Or, oh, okay, I really like this research that you've used, but you need some more research kind of like that. Or maybe you need another example to flesh out your idea more, right? So that you're trying to work really with the text, engage with them. So it's not just a matter of you did this well or you didn't do this well. And that's really the last stage typically of responding to student writing. And if you haven't done the rest of it, then it's even harder to do the evaluation because you haven't taken them through the writing process and helped them work through the writing process as well. And I would say that, these roles, you can do them all at once. You can try to be the cheerleader, coach, and evaluator on a draft, but you're going to make yourself crazy. And you're also going to probably make the student crazy because that is a lot of feedback. So what we like to suggest is be really strategic and choose maybe 1, 2, 3 things to focus on for each particular assignment or draft. Not everything, because it's too much.
And so the hint there is that bottom line, if you define your role, you're gonna cut down your time, right? If you're not doing them all, then the student's getting more targeted feedback. And the feedback lines up with the stage and the process they're at, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so
we put this in here. I mean, I
totally enjoyed putting this in here.
Yeah, I have to say, this was like the most fun I've had in a long time, which clearly we're in a pandemic. Yeah. A lot of times what we think we're saying or what we are saying is not read in the way that we intend it for a student, right? So if you like, even something like this needs to be more concise, a student's like, well, what does that mean? I guess you didn't like it. I'm not good at this. Okay, fine. Well, I'm just going to give up. Or they'll say things like, but I thought you wanted details and evidence, and now you're telling me the opposite, right? And so students, they're not always receiving the messages that we want to send them. So we have to be really targeted and clear with the things that we tell them if we're going to get our points across. So like, you don't want this to happen, right? And I'll tell you, it happens more often than many of us want to think. But if you don't want them to throw it out or discard it, you don't want to do this, right? If you send, and this is not Tim and I making this up, there are many, many studies in composition and rhetoric that tell us that the more comments you put on a paper, the less attention a student pays to it. They get overwhelmed very easily, and they may just put it aside. So you've done all of this work, right? And it's to no end. So we're going to show you what to do instead. And just as a reminder, research also shows us that fear and anxiety and even anger, they block learning, right? So if your students are getting work back and they are freaking out about it and they're feeling upset, they're feeling a heightened level of anxiety, they're not going to be able to function in a way that they're going to learn from it. Now, I'm not arguing that they should never feel discomfort or that they should never be challenged. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, if it's too much, if it's over the top, then it's going to have the opposite effect of what you want. So, you know, yeah, go ahead.
So, Peter Elbow calls this the believing game, and this is just so, he's really writing about our responses to all texts, especially in the academic setting. We're sort of taught in graduate school to doubt everything that you read. Our first move is to say, what's wrong with this? Mm-hmm. You know, where's the, you know, mistaken logic in this? Where, you know, why is this not something I should, you know, take in, right? He says, switch that around and attack texts or look at texts according to what you believe in them, what you think is believable, what is worthy, what is smart about them. So approach texts with positive, I'm going to believe what I can out of this, as opposed to the reverse. And then he goes on to say how with student writing, that is crucial. Because if you approach the text from the start with the doubting game, that's what he calls the opposite way, you're immediately going to start to trash the thing. And you're immediately going to look for all the inconsistencies, inaccuracies, and bad logic. And by the time you're done reading it, the student is not going to be able to make sense of that, right? So you want to be switching that around and look. Your first move is, what can I believe out of this? Where can I take this small kernel of smartness and help the writer build it into something better? Okay. Remember that you are an expert in your discipline. You are also an expert in reading and writing. I like to call us folks, we are the metalinguistic elite. We made it through school, lots of school, graduate school, dissertations, books, etc. That's not who your students are, right? So we tend to forget who we were when we were freshmen in college. Go back and read your own college paper from freshman year and remember that you were one of the smarter ones in the class, and realize that we can't be reading from our current stance. We have to be remembering who our students are. Always offer at least a few positive comments. It's a pretty obvious one there, but often hard to commit to. And identify aspects of the work that can be improved. Okay, identify them. Don't talk in general about things. Identify the specific things that can be improved as a way to be positive and developmental.
Yeah, and I also just want to reiterate the idea of the positive comment, that it's not only because you want to encourage students, which of course, you know, we do, obviously, but it's also that students have a very hard time identifying what they do well as writers and what they don't do well. So one of the first things I always ask my students is, what are you good at as a writer? And even the best students in my class say nothing. Literally, they will all tell me they're terrible at everything. And that's just not true. And so it's actually up to us, I think, to help them see what they are successful at. And then they can keep doing that thing and build on it, rather than, you know, thinking they don't do anything well. Because lots of people most likely have told them that they don't do anything well, especially students who struggle with second language acquisition, or third or fourth in many of our students' cases. And it's not that they're unintelligent or incapable. It's simply that, you know, they have a lot of linguistics activity going on that they often have to then, you know, kind of download into this one version. So if we can help them parse out what they're already good at, that's also really effective for them as writers. So one of the ways that you can start to consider, like, manage the way you respond is what we call in writing studies global and local concerns, right? Which are the global concerns, are like the big issues in a paper. Things like, does this meet the assignment requirements, right? You don't want to spend an hour responding to an assignment that doesn't even do the basics of what you've asked it to do. Does it have an appropriate focus, on an acceptable topic? Does it have a claim that can be argued? Does it have an appropriate structure, right? These are all large concepts that if the paper or the project, the assignment doesn't have these to begin with, that right there is a major problem. So if you start by addressing those issues, I think it makes more sense to start there, right? So say, for instance, you get a paper draft that is, the claim is just, it's a very weak claim. It's not something that it's not gonna carry through the whole paper. It doesn't make any sense for you to spend a lot of time line editing or telling a student, oh, this sentence is awkward, because if their claim isn't strong or their thesis isn't strong, they're gonna have to revise the whole thing anyway, right? So by focusing on these global larger issues first, it kind of pushes the sentence level stuff to later on, when it makes more sense for you and for them to be paying attention to it.
Right, so you can see the reinforcement there of when or what your purpose is, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're early in the writing process, if you've assigned a draft, you definitely leave the line editing out.
Right.
There's just no, you're looking for the students to get to complex critical ideas. You're not looking for the student to write the perfect sentence. So,
and you can think about these things as well, like if you think about the different kinds of things you're assigning. So say, for instance, you're assigning an informal discussion board post, right? You maybe the purpose of that post is for students to think and work through a concept of the course, right? So you don't really, I would argue, you don't need to comment on the sentence level stuff. Comment on what they're talking about. Are they, the purpose of this assignment is for them to start thinking through concept X. So your purpose in responding is helping them think through that concept. So that's all you're responding to. You're not responding to a subject-verb agreement.
Okay, so but nonetheless, we do want to respond to student errors, right? So you may do this on the penultimate draft, right? Or you may do this for just some particular writers, who you've identified. Again, think about your time. Do you want to spend your time line editing the paper of someone who has only made 3 or 4 errors? No, we're all going to make 3 or 4 errors when we hand in something without someone else taking a look over it, right? Occasionally we will spend enough time on something that maybe we could get them all, but you want to focus in on the particular students who need this kind of help. And when you do this, maybe you just line edit 1 paragraph and then ask the students to do the rest, and then hand it back in to you to review the changes that they've made. You can use error, since all the work's being submitted digitally, you can use the track changes in order to see the changes that they made. So if you do want to do that kind of work with particular students, that's a way to do it. Remember that all...
Can I jump into, Tim?
Sure.
Can I just suggest also, if you are going to do line editing work, name the errors for the students, right? So you can say, this is a misused semicolon, or your subject-verb agreement is off, or this is a sentence fragment, so that they can then go look those up, right? So if you just correct their sentence fragments and they don't know what you're fixing and what was wrong, then they're not going to be able to fix it again. But if you say, sentence fragments are a pattern that you have, you need to go to the resource that I've provided for you, look up what a sentence fragment is, and then start applying that to your own work.
Right, and then remember that all errors are not the same kind of error, right? So some errors are citation style errors. We know those well. That is not a grammar error. That is someone not knowing the correct citation, which is a totally pejorative decision made by, a body of scholars to determine, whether you put a comma or not inside a parenthetical, it's crazed, right? That is not a grammar error. Formatting is not a grammar error, right? Because you require 1-inch margins and the students don't do it, that is not a grammar error, right? There are particular grammar issues. Tara mentioned them, mentioned a couple, right? Those are the grammar issues. You will have writers who don't, because of their original language, they do not know subject-verb agreement. That is a grammar error, right? But a lot of errors are just proofreading laziness. Those aren't the same kind of errors. A classic example of that would be the ITS, IT apostrophe S. It's not that the students don't know the difference. I've done this survey in my class for 20 years. Everyone knows the difference between ITS and IT apostrophe S. We're just too lazy to go back and change that error. Same with there and there. Those are not grammar errors. Those are proofreading laziness errors. So if you can identify that category of error for the student and point them in that direction, right? Here are some proofreading processes. You need to use them. On your next paper, I only want to see no more than 3 proofreading errors, errors that could have been caught with good proofreading, right? And then hold them to that. That is so much different than line editing an entire section and making the students think that they have horrendously bad grammar and they shouldn't even be writing or even be in college at all, right? Which is when you overwhelm students with lots of line editing of these different kinds of things all at once, that's the takeaway.
And the other thing that I want to say about student writing that is difficult to read or seems almost nonsensical is that oftentimes that there's a very famous study that was done by David Bartholomew about this. And oftentimes what happens is when students anyone is challenged with a new idea, a new concept, that the sentence level structures falls apart. And it's not because they can't put a sentence together. It's because they're trying to think at a higher level or a different level, and they're grappling with a more sophisticated idea. And because they haven't figured out that idea yet or that concept, they're not able to communicate it clearly in writing. So it's not that, oh my God, what is wrong with these students? They don't understand. They're not reading well. It might not be that. It might simply be that they are really struggling with the concept. So sometimes it's a matter of, that's why I'm saying, like, if you're doing like an informal discussion board about a concept, focus on the concept, and that itself, helping them understand it, might clarify some of their writing too.
Right, that sort of leads into the 2 notes on the bottom. Remember that grammar has nothing to do with intelligence. In fact, your student who can't write the paper because their grammar is so limited, usually because they're coming from a second language or third language, it does not mean they're not getting your course.
Right.
This is especially important in this current modality that we're teaching in, because you might not be giving the test or the quiz and you're not having as much classroom conversation. So the other modalities, the listening and the reading and the speaking, you're not getting much of those, right? So you're seeing, oh, on the discussion board, this person can't even put their thoughts together. And now when they're asked to write the paper, they can't really do that either. So you're limiting yourself to one domain. Realize that that doesn't necessarily mean, and you might have to work hard to get through, the lack of clarity in their writing, to realize that, yes, they actually do understand, what discourse communities are or whatever concept they were writing about. Okay. And then lastly, it's just always good to remember that you're not in charge of making them perfect standard English writers in one semester. Your job is to put them on a path towards that. This is a lifetime activity, right? For us to improve our writing. You're better off giving them a process than you are trying to have them correct every error. Set them on a path to victory.
And I can't say this enough. We only have, 15 weeks, 16 weeks with students for any given class. You cannot fix everything and undo 18, 20 years, of patterns that they've had. So don't beat yourself up about that, for one, and also don't expect a student to completely change who they are as a writer in 16 weeks. But what you can do, like Tim is saying, is get them on that path, give them some strategies. You can also, like, one thing that I like to do is ask students to keep a journal that is just about their writing sort of errors or corrections and successes, so that they can decide as well for themselves, like, okay, this semester in this class, my teachers told me that I have these, 5 problems with grammar. If that's where you want to focus, or if that's where they want to focus, I'm going to try and tackle 3 of them this semester. And so I am going to work on those 3 things. Now, it doesn't mean the writing is going to be perfect at the end, but it's going to be better. And they're going to learn that if they focus and use the resources available, they can start to tackle some of these problems.
Okay, so I mean, that totally falls into the category of the next slide, right? Which is less is more. This is true individually about, giving students help with grammar, but also it's true about comments in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we said this before, when faced with all the comments, they get frustrated. They then start focusing on the sentence level stuff, because that's the easiest things to try and fix, right? As opposed to actually going in and having to come up with a better claim evidence warrant, or to provide more evidence, or to reorganize their paper. They're going through and trying to fix their grammar errors, which is not going to improve the paper overall. So one strategy, again, thinking about time, right? You have a thorough draft of something. You're at the advice stage of your response. You're giving them advice or guidance on how to improve. Take a moment and give them one applause, one thing you noticed, one thing you saw that was done well, because they need to know what they did well, right? And then just give them 2 things, 2 global things to improve, and you're done.
Mm-hmm.
If they were to improve those 2 things, their paper goes from a C to a B, or it goes from a B to an A. That's all you can really ask in one paper, in one course, in one semester, right? You'd be happy if that happened. If you asked a student take this draft and reorganize it this way, again, making your comment specific, reorganize it chronologically instead of the order you have it in, right? Or do your comparison instead of one text at a time, do thematic comparison paragraphs, right? So that's your one comment. And then your second one is that you don't use text, the second text that you've used as evidence, you don't use that one thoroughly enough. Use that one twice as much as you have already. If you just gave those 2 comments and the writer actually did that, you might go from a C to an A. You'd be so happy. What else is it doing? It's cutting down on your reading time.
Right.
You're not going to go back and reread the final version from beginning to end. You're going to look for the 2 things that you asked to be done. Were they done, and how well were they done? And then you're done.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we mean by being strategic and having a purpose. And then that leads to less time.
The other thing that I would just say quickly too is, like everything in your course, I think you should be transparent with your students, right? So tell them, look, I'm gonna focus on these things, or tell them at the beginning of the course, however you want to do it, but be clear, because sometimes what happens if you comment on certain aspects and you're not clear with them about how you're commenting and why you're commenting, they think that if you haven't noted something else, then everything else is perfect. So it's important to let them know that just because you haven't line edited their paper doesn't mean there can't be more improvements, but you're doing this strategically for a particular purpose.
Oops.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so again, remember those stages of what your purpose is when you're responding. If you're in the advice stage, you're giving the students advice on a draft in order for them to produce a better version, okay? All the evidence shows that if you tie your response to the actual revision that you want, the students will attempt that.
Mm-hmm.
If you are more bland and general, you need to improve your organization. The student will more than likely get flustered and not know what to do. Right. So you need to use very specific language. Again, the Google comment boxes work great for this, but I've even done this manually, and you take the picture of the printed out draft with the margin comments in the side and digitally sent it back to students. That does take a little time, but if you really like to work on paper, it works, right? But you want comments like this. Combine these two short paragraphs, right? Yeah. That's what you're looking for, because then the student is going to know what to do, and they're going to learn through that process of doing that. Oh, when I'm tackling two related ideas, they don't always go in separate paragraphs. They need to be combined sometimes. That's what they're learning along the way. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, for instance, if I see a student with paragraphs, like some of them are long and some of them are short and some of them have 3 points and some of them have, half of a point, I might say in the margins, your each paragraph should look like this. And I might like say, topic sentence, main point, evidence, I don't know what I say at the end,
Warrant.
Summary, or transition, right? And I'll say, all of your paragraphs should look like that. And maybe if there's one paragraph that does look like that, I'll say, this is a good example. Here's what I mean, right? So that I'm not addressing every single paragraph in specific, but I am talking about how they can revise and restructure, but doing it in a very specific way, so it's not a mystery to them.
Okay. So then we talk a little bit here about end comments. Tara, I'm looking at the time here, and we're going way longer than we.
I know. I'm sorry.
So, offer your end comments strategically. Some of this stuff repeats what we've said before.
Right. So like you can think of this structure here that's down here is kind of what we've been saying all along, right? So if you're going to write end comments on a paper or a project, you might start with a strength or two, a limited summary of problems or issues, and then very clear recommendations for how to fix this, right? So that a student has kind of a game plan going into the revision. So that it's not just general comments. Okay. And then, we also want to encourage you to use resources and for your students to use resources. You don't have to go it alone. One thing you can do is peer review, which we talked about in the last session. But there are different ways you can use peer review. We're not going to go over that because we are quickly running out of time. You can refer students to the Writing Center. You can refer students to the Math and Science Resource Lab. You can use resources like the Purdue Online Writing Lab or the Excelsior Writing Lab. There's library resources, right? So you don't have to do everything yourself. And if you're pointing students toward these resources and maybe even using some of them yourself, they can really help you with the heavy lift.
So I'll just give two quick examples there. One with the Writing Center. So the Writing Center has a form that you can fill out to send a student to the Writing Center. Mm-hmm. And if I have a student who I think, and also the Writing Center is not just for bad writers or writers who need grammatical help. We all benefit from having someone else's eyes on our work and giving us feedback on whatever it is we want help with, right? So let's say you have a student paper that's really disorganized. You can simply take the Writing Center feedback form, and there's a spot in there, what should the student go to the Writing Center for? And you can fill that in with, the student needs to work on this paper draft for its organization and structure. Mm-hmm. And that's your feedback. You could write some other things on the paper itself, good things or whatever, but that's what you want the student to do. Send them to the Writing Center with that feedback form, with that comment form. And that's what they're going to work on, right? And the other example I'll give is, we were talking before about grammar issues, telling a student that they have the pattern error of subject-verb agreement and that they should go to the Purdue Online Writing Lab and research what subject-verb agreement is. And then they should work in their next draft to not have any subject-verb agreement errors. That's giving them a path to victory, right? Mm-hmm. It's all there. There's nothing that's not on the Purdue OWL or the Excelsior Writing Lab. And it's not just grammar stuff. It would be the same thing if you wanted students to use evidence better or do a better close reading, or literally every topic you could imagine is covered there. So you can direct students to the resource and then ask for them to do that on the next draft of the paper. Okay, so we're not going to do this slide. This is a recap of the peer review that we did in the last session, but realize that peer review is an assignment in and of itself. It's got to be designed. It has to have a purpose, etc. Okay, really good way, especially in the online environment, to get a little collaboration going in your class. So highly recommend it. Okay, so gonna cut this a little short too. I will just hope that this link works, and I hope you're seeing that. You're seeing that, right? So this is the same assignment that we used in the first presentation and in the second presentation. For those of you who weren't there, this is from a 100 level course. Notice I know the formatting got screwed up when we loaded it up into this presentation, but you know that it has steps. It's got the purpose defined. It has all the genre things, right? Down here in orange, it tells you the genre and the structure. It's got the stance in the audience. It's got ways to get help, right? So this is good assignment design. We use the same assignment as far as planning was concerned, right? How do you plan curriculum? Well, this is the curriculum of the course, because it's asking the students to use readings from the course, right? They're learning the readings by using them in the writing assignment, okay? So you want to then carry that all the way through. Now, how do I get back to my presentation is the question.
Go up to the browser bar.
Right. So you want to carry that all the way through, and you want to respond accordingly. Not now again, I just hit the wrong thing. Lord knows what's coming up right now. You want
to the left of there you go.
So this is my list. That was my assignment. This is my list of the response the students got on this assignment. I went back and looked it up. You're looking at that list going, that's impossible. There's no way I'm giving 6 responses to my 27 in this case, and you probably have 35 students, right, in a particular section. If you were to take just the end product and try and do all those modes of coach, supporter, guidance, and evaluator all at once, you'll spend more time than I will, right? I'm doing it as I go. It's part of the curriculum of the course.
Right.
The students are learning the stuff that I want them to learn by doing the writing assignment. I'm giving them feedback as we go through. Especially in an online environment, I wouldn't change a thing. I'd be doing the same thing.
Which is why we're saying like that any kind of, writing should really be infused throughout the course. And it really, if you're doing that way, you can do these different kinds of feedback throughout. So you're not waiting until the end or till week 10, where suddenly you have a writing assignment that you have to now deal with, and you haven't dealt with any writing before from these students. If it's built into the assignment design, it gives you many more opportunities to give students feedback in a very limited and strategic way, so that ultimately you are giving them tons of feedback, but not all at once.
I'll just say 2 more things about this. So this is the non-digital version of the course, right? If I was doing this in an online course, this one here, step 3, I would have had the students post their raw data to the discussion board, and I would have had the students commenting on each other's raw data. What do you see? What are the patterns? What are the anomalies, right? And then I would have done the same for each student. Right. So I would have given a 2 or 3 sentence response to everyone's data, right? And in that way, plow through 27 of them in a couple hours, right? 2 hours probably max, okay? So that I would have changed that, but this would all stay the same. It would just be done via breakout rooms and sharing screen, right? So notice the peer review step. If I design a good rubric and I have the students use it on each other's papers, and then I use it to give feedback, when I get to this evaluation stage, I'm just checking boxes. I'm writing no comments at all, right? There's a score of 1 to 5 for each category. I'm just like, proficient, exceeds proficiency, not proficient, needs work.
Right.
Done, next paper. Right. So when I get to step 6, I'm spending maybe 2 minutes on each paper because of the work that we did along the way.
Right.
Okay. All right. What do you think, Tara?
Well,
it's okay. 2:30. No, we got time.
Okay.
2:30 to 2:40, and then closing for 10 minutes.
Sure. So we're going to put you all in breakout rooms. Gina has set them up. Thank you, Gina. So we're going to ask you to take about 10 minutes and think about the writing you're currently assigning to keep us kind of focused and limited. Choose just one assignment. Okay, so one assignment that you are currently assigning or about to assign, and think about how you're going to respond to that next set of assignments, whether it be a draft or whatever it is, right? So something's
might be just a discussion board.
Maybe just right. Maybe it's just
might be they've attached something to the discussion board, like an outline or a proposal or something.
Right. So just choose one thing that is real that you're going to be facing, say, in the next week or so, and we'd like you to think about 2 things. What's your purpose for commenting on this piece? So you have to think about it contextually. Where does it fit in the course? Where does it fit, if it does, in a larger assignment? Will the students be able to revise or not? Because that should shape the kinds of comments you're giving them. You know, is it a final draft? Is it a low stakes assignment? You know, what kind of piece is it? And what do you want them to do with your comments? So identify those things for yourselves, and then based on those, what strategies are you going to employ? So of all the things that we've offered you, you know, so say this is a discussion board post. And it's really just meant to get students to engage with a concept. Okay, so that's a clear purpose. So maybe your purpose there when you're commenting is to help them understand the concept, to give them something more to think about, to extend their ideas. So then what strategies are you going to use? Maybe you'll do a quick sentence or 2 to each student in their discussion board, and maybe you'll do a wrap-up comment for that discussion board post that goes to everybody. Right? You're not commenting on sentence structure. You're not commenting on anything but the content of what they're saying. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay.
They're all going to say, no, it doesn't make any sense.
So Gina should be, I think, is putting us into.
You should all be getting it, including you again. You should have invitations.
Okay, thanks, Gina.
Caroline, would you like to share an assignment to the whole group and what feedback you want to give on that assignment?
That was, first of all, thank you so much. And thank you to my group mates. I really have learned a lot in this hour about what to do. I think, so one assignment that I'm giving it's just a 2-page close reading of a panel from a graphic text. And it's lit, intro to lit. So they've been doing close readings in various formats, discussion boards, wikis, journals, that kind of stuff. They gave a low stakes journal response about it. And in my response to that, I pointed out something I wanted them to do differently, better, whatever, elaborate on for the longer paper. So that's the one coming in. So and what that is most of them were very good about analyzing the text or the plot, familiar elements of the graphic text, but not the visual details, possibly because they didn't think that was legitimate because it's an English class, a lit class. Maybe they don't want to talk about lines or arty things or whatever. So I gave them permission in the journal feedback to do that, encourage them. And so that's what I will read for, is them doing that. And so that makes me look like I am doing such a good job on all the things that you guys have told us to do. But that's because I had all the time to figure out how to sound like a good student so that I get an A. And so, but I think one of the things that I would love to hear about more, if there was ever more time, is it's the number of different formats. So like when you guys are talking one long scaffolded assignment, this is a brilliant way of thinking about it. It's the discussion board, wiki, journal, this, that, student, this kind of, I mean, it's the multiplicity of places which we should apply this great advice that you've given us. That's the advice is super sound. It's that you have to, it's like spraying it from a garden hose, that
I
feels
think it
kind of
sounds
crazy.
like you're doing more than you maybe need to do, Caroline.
Yeah, thank Tara. The fact that I'm working like 80 hours a week, I totally am. I'm just dying here this semester.
I've been teaching online for 7 or 8 years and I don't use all that stuff. I mean, most of my, I use Blackboard, and most of my stuff is every week they do a discussion board assignment, and then they turn in what I call a low stakes assignment. And I break the course up into like 3 or 4 units, and every unit has a major assignment, but all of the discussion boards and the low stakes lead up to the major assignment. So I'm only reading 2 assignments a week: a discussion board, which is of course low stakes and, you know, super like informal and working through stuff and all that thing, and then a low stakes assignment, which might be something like an annotated bibliography or something. And
like, that's awesome. But if you have, you know, 25 students in 3 sections, that's 2 low stakes assignments for 75 students, which, excuse my math on the fly, but that's about 150 points of contact. Even if you're not line editing and all that other kind of stuff, that's a lot of feedbacking.
Well, I would say, like, for the discussion boards, I don't respond to every single student on the discussion board every single week. So I'll always respond to the discussion board. But like some weeks I'll choose 5 people and I'll give them direct comments, and then the whole group gets a major comment about what their feedback is, and, you know, kind of a wrap-up comment. And then the next week I'll choose a couple more students. I mean, if it's a really short discussion board and it's easy, then I might respond to every single student, or if it's something I really have to respond to, but I don't respond to every single student every single time. You know, in the low stakes assignments I do, but I have a clear purpose. I know exactly what I'm responding to. So I'm only giving, like, you know, a short piece of commentary for each one. Yeah.
Right. And
I mean,
you know, you can also encourage your students to look for the ones that you responded to in a particular discussion board.
Yes.
So the students can read the initial response, the initial post, the other student's response, and then the professor's response, and then someone else responded after that, etc. And in that, they're learning from that. It wasn't their post, but they're still getting learning, right? So yeah, there's no way to respond to every student on a discussion board. And even, you know, on a low stakes assignment, I might not respond to everyone. You know, I'll pick out 10, and then the other time I'll do the other 10. And then the third time I'll do the third 10.
Do you find that if you're not grading everyone still makes a contribution?
Yes, because they don't know, A, they're getting performance points for just posting something, right? B, they don't know who I'm going to read, right? You got to be a little tricky, and, you know, they can't know who's I'm going to pick. But yeah.
Yeah, and like, so when I do the discussion board, there's always almost always 2 parts to it, where the first part is they have to create their initial post, whatever the assignment is. The second part is they have to respond to at least 2 of their classmates' posts. So every single week, they have to respond to one another. So there's no way of getting out of that because that's part of the assignment. So even though I'm not responding to everyone, they're all getting individual comments. And then they're going to get graded on it, like, because I grade every single thing they do. I mean, it's not like they're getting an A, B, C grade, but maybe the discussion board's worth 5 points. So they're all going to get those points or not get those points, even if I'm not giving them very specific feedback.
Okay, so let's conclude the class.
Sorry, very, very briefly, I'm doing weekly reflections every week, but they also do discussion posts and worksheets. But I have a specific prompt where in the weekly reflections, they have to reflect on the discussion posts they wrote and the worksheets, so that when I read the weekly reflections every week, so I know that they have done the other 2 and kind of get a sense of what they did. So that, you know, just reading the weekly reflections, I know what kind of work they did in the week. And that's helping, especially in the online environment.
Oh, that's a great idea. I love that.
All right, Tara, let's see how fast you can go through these last couple slides.
Okay, so I wanted to give you some really specific ways to do commenting, the kind of the nuts and bolts of Blackboard, and maybe you're already doing these, but in case you're not, there are options. So when you go into the grading center, and you click on an assignment, you very often, depending on how the student submitted it, you can do in-text comments. A little comment bar will pop up, kind of like the one you get on Word. And you can do in-text comments. You can underline, you can circle, you can do little comment bubbles. So you're basically giving marginal comments. But then when you also give in the quote feedback to learner box, that's where you can type stuff out. You can also add attachments to that box. So if you wanted to, like a lot of times what I'll do is if a student hasn't done the assignment correctly, I'll attach the assignment to it, to the directions, even though it's posted on Blackboard. I'm like, look, it's right here, no excuse. Look at the assignment, right? So you can do that. You can also, if you expand the feedback box, you'll see a little teeny tiny microphone. You can click on that microphone and you can voice record your comments. So if you're getting tired of typing, you can voice record them, and then that's, you know, the student just has to click on it and it'll be a little recording of your voice if you want to do comments that way.
And there's a perfect example of like how you can have the student think that you're reading every word that they write without you actually having to do that. You can make a voice comment that just says, hey, that was a really smart thing you just wrote.
Yeah.
Next,
right. Blackboard also has grading rubrics, and you can design, they have ones you can use, which I don't really like, but if you just want to try it, you can also create your own, and they're very easy. And then you can link them to the assignment. So when the student submits it and you go to grade it, that rubric will pop up and you just click on the rubric itself. And it'll do the grading and everything for you. It's pretty amazing. Also and we talked about this too a little bit, but on the discussion board itself, obviously you can do individual comments to individual students, but you can also do a broad comment, like I just said. And I think, you know, I like the idea of the broad comment because you're a little bit less like overseeing them, and it's more that you're participating. Because I don't like it, I don't want my relationship with them to be only one of like, you know, authoritarian. I want to engage with them, and I'm sure we all do. So I find like the broad comment is more about me adding to the discussion and less about me correcting them. They respond to it differently than when it's an individual comment.
How do you do that exactly?
Just create a new thread. So if you're on the discussion board, and it says create thread, you just push the create thread button and you'll create your own message. And then, you know, and I also mentioned, I think I mentioned these things. Oh wait, can you go to the next slide, Tim? Yeah. Another thing, a couple other things you can do in it keeps jumping. Yeah, there you go. I use the announcement feature a lot in Blackboard. You know, I remind students about things, but also like if I see an issue in, say, an assignment or a draft, I'll put it in the announcements in addition to maybe writing about it in the grading function. The kind of the way that I would say something in class, like, hey, you guys all, you know, did a good job with your thesis statements, but most people are having this issue. And I'll write it up and put it in the announcements and email it to them. So you can just, when you do the announcements, when you write one, it'll say, send this directly to your students. And if you click on that, it blasts it out to them. I like that. You know, you could also use Blackboard Collaborate if you wanted to hold like maybe group conferences or one-on-one conferences. Zoom, of course, you can use for that, and for breakout rooms as well. You know, don't forget, you can sometimes do synchronous meetings especially if you feel like a student is just floundering. Maybe they just need a quick face-to-face meeting as well.
All right, so we wanted to leave you with something optimistic here. Tara has her usual resources on the end.
Yeah.
But I know folks have to go, right? So if you want to learn a few things, there is no better person in composition and rhetoric for writing about responding to student writing than Gordon Harvey. You should go read this article. You'll feel better and you'll learn a lot. So I highly recommend, and I give you a little link to a PDF there, fully well knowing that there's no way that you could possibly copy it. But that is, you know, you can just go online and put in Gordon Harvey responding to student writing, and he's got 3 or 4 articles that are well worth reading. And then here's the WAC resources. Man, this is getting touchy.
I know. So the
Okay.
WAC Clearinghouse is a great site for all kinds of resources for teaching, specifically teaching writing. I've pulled some of them out. These are all direct links. So we're gonna, you'll get access to these slides, but these are all direct links to the slides. But you don't even have to use this. If you literally just Google WAC Clearinghouse, it'll come up and it's very easy to use. This is another, the second one is a blog post by a faculty member at Stony Brook, which I really liked. And actually all of the line drawings from this presentation are from this article. And so if you go to the next slide, Tim, one more back, sorry. There you go. There's the site for the WAC Clearinghouse, and the Writing Commons is another really good site. And that has materials that you could give to students. It's more student focused, but I find it really useful. And it's open source, so you have no problems using it in classes.
Okay, so with that, we're a few minutes over, and I'm sorry about that. But hopefully you were able to take in a lot with our speed slide deck here. We're always open for, if you want to send us an email, you have a concern or a worry or need something that we went through quickly and want to hear more about it, or a link to a resource or whatever. So feel free to email us via the John Jay email. But other than that, that's it. Thanks so much. Thanks Tara.
Everybody.
And
Thank you. Super. Thank you.